Welcome to the Jess Larsen Show, where I interview innovators and leaders. Today on the show, I'm excited to have Doug London. Doug, thanks for doing this.
Thanks. Great to be here. Great to be considered an innovator.
Well, I am a big fan of your new book. For everybody who doesn't know about it, The Recruiter, Spying and the Lost Art of American Intelligence. I literally just finished it yesterday and have already bought 2 hard copies to give away. So congrats on writing a great book.
Thanks. That's awesome. They make great stocking stuffers as well at Christmas.
Yeah, I love it. In fact, give people 4. You may as one is never enough. So can you give people a quick maybe overview on your background, and then I have about 100 questions for you.
Oh, cool. Well, I grew up in New York City, in the Bronx, actually, and probably could have been a ne'er-do-well, like a lot of the folks with whom I grew up, who kind of split between either becoming cops or doing the other end of things. But I was lucky and worked hard, and I got spotted actually by CIA, which was really fortunate for me because I had actually aspired to be a diplomat, go into the Foreign Service, and was lucky enough to have this wonderful professor who was an adjunct, kind of like what I do these days at Georgetown. And he'd been an ambassador. He'd been ambassador at a couple of posts, and he would teach like a course a semester, and I found him just riveting. But he was actually in touch with the agency, as some folks like that are, because he would pass on, the names of other foreign diplomats he would meet, perhaps, Russians and Chinese and the like, because his last post was at the United Nations. And I think he saw in me not quite the medal for a polished diplomat, but more like the second story kind of thing, which is kind of the turn of the phrase at the day for someone who perhaps has different skills and maybe a somewhat different moral compass, God forbid. So out of nowhere, I get a call from a federal government official. What do you make of that? U.S. federal government official. And it was the agency. And after a series of interviews and a process, which, we could talk about if your listeners are interested, they hired me. And I did that for 34 plus years. I was a case officer in CIA's Medicine Service. I served more than half that time overseas. I'm not permitted to say the exact countries I served in. I could talk about countries I visited, and there are sometimes overlap. But I served at 9 different overseas posts, mostly in the Middle East, South Asia, Africa, former Soviet republics, and what I'm allowed to say, conflict zones in the Middle East and South Asia. And I retired in 2019. And since that time, I've been getting into trouble by writing things. And I teach at Georgetown, who were silly enough to hire me as an adjunct. They would never have admitted me as a student. And I teach courses on intelligence studies, which are just great fun to graduate students.
That's exciting. And when did the book come out?
The hardcover came out in September of 2021. And luckily, there was enough interest that the paperback is coming out on September 6th. So I'm really excited about that and really gratified at the amount of interest I've had.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'm a real audiobook nerd. Our listeners know that all I do is talk about books, Warren Buffett, and special ops and the intel community, which is funny for a business show. But I consume a lot of audiobooks, and you guys did a good job. A lot of times the narrator makes it tough to enjoy the book, and congrats on that one.
The narrator was great. The only problem is he was so great, people are disappointed when they actually speak to me and hear my voice, because they keep thinking they're going to hear his voice. So I try to manage expectations on it.
Well, I think it's great. So let's do this. I feel like there's so many questions I have, but I think what I really appreciated, having consumed a lot of nonfiction in the intelligence community, I feel like you gave such a flavor for what it's like to be a recruiter and understanding the nuances of source operations and this concept of how much better it is to persuade than force. Why don't we start with that? Can we talk about your beliefs on persuasion over blackmail or force?
Well, I mean, fortunately, even the agency and its teaching of case officers, and I did that for a while, taught at what we call the farm, which everybody can see online, but I'm not allowed to say where it is. But I taught there, and that's actually part of the curriculum, that coercion is just not effective. And it's not just because, we're, ethical and take the high ground. I like to think we are to some extent, but it just doesn't work. In fact, it's a model more used by autocratic states. Russia, Chinese, Iran, they tend to use it because in some ways it's easy or easier, but has short-lived gains. If you're recruiting someone to be a spy, you're recruiting someone who's in a position of knowledge. And if you're spying on your adversaries, that's not necessarily, you know, the purest of souls. Sometimes it is. Sometimes there are folks who've had revelations and are actually patriots and want to do something from the inside to change their system. And it's gratifying to deal with those. But if you're recruiting a terrorist, as I had some experience doing as well, these aren't people I want to coerce and then meet in some back alley in Beirut or Karachi where my life is also in their hands. I need to have some reliability in them that we're partners in all this together. And it really is very much a partnership when you recruit a spy or an agent, as we call them in the agency. You're collaborating conspiratorially with risk to both. The greater risk, more often being to the agent. In a lot of places, I might get roughed up, but I'll probably make it home. Not necessarily in conflict zones or some other interesting places, but more or less. But agents, unfortunately, if they're caught, it could be very well their lives, the lives of their families, and the future of their family. There's another component to that as well. If you think about what we're doing, we're collecting intelligence not just for the fun of it, and it's fun, I'll tell you, which is thrilling, but we're doing it for the purpose of informing decision making, important decisions, life and death decisions that leaders have to make in government and in the military and such like that. So you have to stand behind the intelligence you're collecting. I don't know how you stand behind intelligence you're getting from someone who you blackmailed to provide it, how you can offer any sense of confidence in this information is accurate, it's reliable, it's to the best of the agent's ability to provide. So the partnership is necessary for a process, and it is a process to actually vet the agent, because you don't recruit somebody and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, we've got gold. You let the consumer know that an agent's new. An agent might at this point be just speaking out of school or trying to influence, until you have an opportunity over time to continually get deeper into the agent and their motivations and what their life is like. It's a dynamic that's beyond friendship or beyond troops in a military unit. It's a depth of intimacy that's required to secure their trust, so you keep them out of harm's way, keep yourself out of harm's way, but also stand behind your agent's reporting. So it's a great dynamic of true human relations, and in some ways, the most intimate relationship that agent will have. And I say that in all candor, because the case officer is non-judgmental. I handled folks of all walks of life. Like I said, some were heroes and patriots, some were not. A number of them had blood on their hands. Some of them had American blood on them. So you're not telling your agent, oh, you're the best thing since sliced bread. Everything you've done is great, but you're also not judging them. And they also know that you are going to keep their secrets. They can tell you anything from the depth of their heart and soul, black, white, or otherwise, because you will keep that. It's a little bit like a confessional, but it's an important component for their safety and for you really to gauge the intelligence that you're getting from them. So it's a fascinating walk of life.
Yeah. Um, Maybe to start with, before I launch into a bunch more questions, can you help people understand some of the vocabulary, because it's not the same as Hollywood? Can you talk about the difference between, or like the impreciseness of the word spy, and talk about case officer and source and agent, and just maybe some of the different vocabulary?
So for the CIA anyway, and for intelligence services that collect intelligence and human intelligence, the case officer is the official or non-official, because you could also operate under a non-official cover, but you're the U.S. government person who's recruiting an agent, handling the agent. You're the one who securely communicates with the agent. And we call them an agent for CIA because, like FBI and diplomatic security, they're agents, right? They're special agents. But we consider our sources, it's probably a fair term, to be our agents or our assets. We use that word interchangeably. And the handler, the collector, is called the case officer. And the case officer is one occupation in the clandestine service that includes targeters, staff operations officers who are essentially program managers, paramilitary operations officers, collection management officers. But the individual who goes out, recruits the agent, handles the agent, lurks in the back streets, that's a case officer. If you go on the CIA website, these days you'll see it referred to as operations officer. But inside, it's really case officer. The term spy is a little more subjective, right? Because the agent is, in fact, the spy within his or her organization. And I say organization consciously because we're collecting secrets not just from armies and governments, but from transnational groups, targeting terrorist organizations, criminal syndicates, drug organizations, and cartels. Sometimes that organization is family, their actual family. They derive their access not because they're in an official position, like they're a colonel in the army or they're a counterintelligence officer, but they're cousin to a terrorist or a drug cartel ringleader. So we are spying on the organization. The agent is the spy within the organization, but most case officers, at least of my long in the tooth nature, consider ourselves spies because we're spy handlers and ourselves spies managing the clandestine art of espionage, which is eluding those who would try to catch you, namely, counterintelligence adversaries, or whatever other assortment of bad guy, if you would. So I've always considered myself a spy, and I spy to gain secrets for the United States.
That's
great. Or at
great.
least I did.
So I want to bring up something you talked about, this idea of, that it's not just a game, that your physical harm is likely on the table and the possible death of your agent and their family is potential depending on the country. Can you talk about your mindset? I think there's so many of us that they've watched a movie or read a fiction book or something, and there's this fantasized version of it. And then there's the real life, like, oh no, I'm really about to do this. Like, I just went skydiving for the first time for my birthday. And on the way up the plane, I wasn't very nervous. I was with a guy who'd done like 18 tandem jumps. He has the European world record for the highest skydive in history and stuff. But on the way up, I thought, I might die. Like, we may not make this. Pretty likely we will. But, just like quick reflection on life and just being honest about what we're about to do, and that has much more certainty than the situation you're going into with all the years of practice and the safety and the parachutes and the everything. Can you talk about your mindset, maybe what you told yourself or your philosophy of how you kind of get in the right headspace when you are, ready to head out in the middle of the night and you don't control the future? Anything could happen.
Yeah, it's a weird confluence of traits and philosophies and thoughts, because we're not Jason Bourne. Jason Bourne wouldn't be effective because an effective spy is average, boring, under the radar. The most important element you can bring to the table is simply not being noticed. So you've got, whatever charm and personality and interpersonal skills you need, which have to be enhanced in order to engage your agent, because recruiting actually never stops. It's not just persuading someone to undertake this mission, but keeping them motivated, keeping them close enough to you that they're trusting you with things that happen in their life, because life happens, life changes. And the motivations that you might have manipulated, and that's what we do, we manipulate people's needs and interests, and we try to provide solutions for those needs and their greatest problems. They change. Problems come and go, or they change, or people are different walks of life. So it's this funny kind of juxtaposition of being able to turn it on whenever you need to, but also being able to tune it down so that you don't stand out and get someone's attention. So we're not like special operators. We're trained in all these various skills. I've been trained to jump out of airplanes or pull out of helicopters, carry all sorts of arms. but not to get in a fight, but to get the hell out of a fight. So I'm looking to avoid conflict. I'm looking to avoid the bar brawl. But God forbid something happens, I need to at least get off the X. And that's what we're trained to do. Special operators, people in the armed forces, they're running to the sounds of gunfire. They're there to do that. We're running away from the sounds of gunfire because our secrets are worth so much more. And that's what we're trying to protect. And, one of me, going into battle is really not what you want. I was in the Marines, and the Marine Corps and I both realized it wasn't a great fit because I was more of a smart ass than a badass. So I luckily found my way to CIA. But at the same point, you very seriously understand the risks because in some ways it's like a game and it's fun and it's play, but with real serious consequences, and the consequences being the life of your agent, which we will put our lives in harm's way to protect first and foremost. So the mindset, also being different than the military, when a case officer's on the street, more or less, more likely, he or she's on their own. There's no cavalry. There's no air support. There's no calling in help. It's your wits that have to navigate whatever might come your way. And the personality traits we look for, in fact, in someone who does that job is their ability to adjust to dynamic circumstances. I know those are canned terms, but they're legit because things happen. As a case officer, for every variable you can consider, you're not just manipulating people, the agent, to commit to this relationship. You're manipulating the environment to know what routes and streets and ways to get there so you're not followed, or if you are, you identify it. You're manipulating the local counterintelligence service so that you're hidden in the shadows. You don't stand out to them and they see some reason for anything you're doing that seems boring or legitimate, nothing of concern to them. And you think of any and everything that could possibly go wrong, but then there's always some things that go wrong that you can't plan for. You show up and you're about to meet your agent, and their cousin Muhammad is just coming out of a store across the street, and cousin Muhammad works for the counterintelligence service. Things like that. What do? Right? You get in a car accident. You have an agent that has a heart attack in the middle of a clandestine meeting. What do you do if you're agent? You just, you don't just leave him there to die on the street. So these are all things you can't plan for everything. And there's a component of risk to everything you do. And we talk a lot in the clandestine service about cover. And there's cover for status and cover for action. And real quickly, my best explanation is think of the Grinch Who Stole Christmas. I actually taught it this way at the farm. So if you saw the Grinch Who Stole Christmas, you remember the Grinch goes to steal the tree and the packages and stuff, and he's dressed like Santa Claus, right? That's his cover for status. He's Santa Claus, and everybody sees him as Santa Claus. My cover for status might have been a U.S. official. It might have been a business person, right? Depending on what I was doing. Might have been a student. That's who I was. That's what I was doing there in country. But when he was actually stealing a tree, and little Cindy Lou Who, who's no more than 2, goes, "What are you doing, Santa?" He goes, "Oh my goodness, your light's broken on the tree. I've got to take it back to my shop." That was his cover for action. That was his reason for actually taking the tree. So Santa suit to be there, the tree's broken light, cover for action. You're thinking of all the variables because cover has to last forever. A week from now, a month from now, a year from now, they could be investigating, canvass the neighbors, the shop owners go, "Did you see a picture of this guy and this girl," or whatever? Your cover has to endure. And it's got to be the same if you're actually called on the carpet. Now, ideally, it's a meeting that was never seen. We call it clandestine for a reason. Clandestinity means concealed, right? Not hiding in plain sight like Jason Bourne likes to do, which I always find amusing, standing like a train station where there's like 500 sets of eyes and cameras, but like actually being black is what we call it. No one sees you. So you try to screen your contact, but things happen. You missed a camera, you missed a neighbor, whatever. And that's where cover comes in. So all of those points in the engagement of your agent has a physical risk. You could be ambushed by, counterintelligence folks or terrorists. And I've had both occur. Right? So, what do you do under those circumstances to protect your agent and ideally protect yourself? So you take a swagger. So the swagger at least may be similar to the special ops folks, because you have to believe you own the street, you own the night. And there's this feeling can't really describe when you know you're black and you've been out there and you've run your surveillance detection route, which is what we call the path you take to meet with your clandestine agent. And I can't get into details, but it's what you do over a period of time and distance and whatever to identify possible surveillance before you actually go into your zone to meet your agent. And when you feel you're black, and it's not feel, you know you're black, there's this amazing feeling that you're off the grid. You own this place. You own them. You own the bad guys. So, swagger, confidence, and an appropriate sense of fear and respect kind of all come together.
Can I ask you about this confidence thing for a second?
Sure.
When you talk about that, it reminds me, I've got being an entrepreneur has a certain amount of uncertainty as well, right? And so one of my ways to overcome anxiety is try to emotionally hijack myself, whether it's music I listen to or, I've got these YouTube videos, it might be funny videos or it might be motivational videos. And so I'll listen to I've got this whole playlist of Ramon Decker is one of the best Muay Thai fighters and, amazing snowboarders and Michael Jordan and all these kind of guys, right? And I just have this playlist. The recruiting video for the unit that's the old leaked one, stuff like this. It's online, okay? And there's this Michael Jordan video where apparently a lot of interviewers were obsessed with asking what he was afraid of, because it's clip after clip of people saying, "Do you have fear? What are you scared of? What are you most scared of?" and all this stuff. And his answer was pretty standard, where he said, "Of course I'm anxious. I don't control the future." This paraphrasing. I don't control the future. I'm anxious. I want to win. But he says, "I'm not really fearful because I knew I put in the work. And so I didn't have to be fearful because I had the skills because I put in the work." Is owning the street related to that in any way? Or how much of preparation helps you get out there and own the street, as you said it?
Well, there's all sorts of prep. There's whenever you meet an agent, you've gone through everything that has already happened, all the dynamics, everything's on the street, capabilities of your adversaries. Are there any changes? Because, agents also go bad. They get turned, they get caught. So you're looking for any anomalies there as well. So there is sort of the long-term preparation. I've got a meeting coming up this month, 2 weeks from now, a week from now, where you're doing all your prep because, you don't have hours. Clandestine meetings, particularly with very sensitive agents that are face-to-face, are incredibly short. And there's a lot of business to conduct in a real short period of time. And a lot of that business is just gauging your agent. Is he or she okay? Are they acting different? What's going on in their life? So it's not all business. You don't treat them like they're a customer or a business client or, God forbid, an employee. You treat them like a partner, like a true friend. So you're going through all that, and you're reviewing, what's going on with their family, and his kid had a cold a couple of weeks ago, and you're also re-familiarizing yourself with the requirements because, as fun as spying is, we do it for a reason. We have specific questions that the intel community, that leaders need to know. What are Russian hypersonic missile capabilities? What is Al Qaeda planning to do next? Who's the new chief of ops? So you're trying to get to all this business, including communications, right? Because don't forget, you have to go over, here's how we're meeting next time. Here's what we're doing next time. Here's new questions. Here's old questions. So it's a ton of prep, but then you're also doing the psychological prep. So I've been putting everything together, right, for whatever period of time leading up to the meeting that I'm prepared. I know my questions. I don't need to write anything down because if you write things down, you get caught and you got something to explain. I might write down some keywords that mean something to me. I might write down keywords of their answers. I don't record the meeting because if I get pinched, so does the recording. But I'm also doing a pregame. So before I go out to a meeting, I usually give myself time to think it through, kind of get into character because, case officer has to be a chameleon. And Sometimes they're adopting persona, sometimes they're adopting an alias. I'm be meeting this person as someone else in an alias. I need to be that person. Either, maybe I'm bookworm Doug or, former special forces Doug or whatever it is I made up. I've played many characters on TV. So I'm getting into all that as well. And I kind of pumping myself up as well. I'm visualizing my surveillance detection route because I can't have like directions, right? I can't be driving or walking and looking at something. I have to know exactly where I'm turning, what I'm doing, how long it gets from point A to point B, because everything's precise. Can't have the agent waiting for me. I can't be waiting for the agent. There's a window we talk about. So I'm going all this in my head, but I'm probably listening to like stupid tunes like Top Gun or something like that to also kind of get in to the feeling, to kind of get myself where I need to be so that when I do walk out that door, I'm in charge. I'm anxious, like the interview, Michael Jordan. That's really well put. I'm always anxious because I can't control everything, but I am ready. I am completely prepared. I own my streets. I own my territory. I own this operation, and I'm ready for anything to come at me. And with all that cockiness and confidence, I'm also trying to be as boring and small and little as I can. So when I'm riding that bus, that train, whatever like that, nobody notices.
Yeah, it makes me think that that movie, The Gray Man, is not a very great a very great
No,
application of being a great man.
no, he's
Okay,
not
so
very gray,
I've so many. Yeah, yeah. Um, so I want to talk about this idea of the psychology. Before the show, we were talking about how at our charity, Child Rescue Association. By the way, everybody go check out our website, childrescueassociation.org. We're getting ready right now. We've got a former case officer from the intelligence community who's going to be teaching law enforcement officers how to recruit, high-level source inside one of the criminal organizations that's trafficking children. Somebody we can leave in place and can inform for years instead of just a bust, right? And part of it, as I've thought about, because I'll be assisting with it and trying to make sure these classes go well and stuff, and making sure that he has everything he needs and the officers have what they need and that kind of stuff. My team helping out with that, right? And it makes me think about one of our team members who went on an undercover mission down in Central America, working with the intelligence division of a police force down there, who actually on the mission wore their own balaclavas so that because there's so much corruption in the police force, they didn't want the other cops to know who they were. Okay, But this individual talked about this idea of, it was their first one. So they were with other folks who were running the op, but this was their first one ever going. And, so these two sets of two traffickers brought in 8 different kids. And then the cops came in to do the bust, and we were able to, facilitate the police rescuing these 8 girls and getting those traffickers as well as another couple of associates who weren't there. And it was in the newspapers and great success story. But this team member of ours talks about this idea of like how they did 2 operations on that trip. And the first one, they talked about this idea of like almost like being outside themselves and like almost feeling like too wooden and like not like there was like an anxiety or like a concern of like not being able to get into character and reflecting on it, feel like, man, I almost jeopardized all of us because I wasn't playing the part well enough. And I was so involved in the whole operation that I wasn't able to be myself, kind of an idea. And then when they talked about like the reflection on that and how the second operation they did that week, they were able to really kind of go like, they describe it almost like a method actor, where they thought about a cover that was very close to who they really were. And they were able to really spend some time imagining, well, what would it be like if I was, if I was this kind of person, I was in this country for this reason, and we were going out to party. And that second time it went completely different because they were actually able to be the character instead of tell themselves what they should be. So it's kind of a convoluted story, but my question for you is, for somebody who in a situation like that, who on their first time out recognizes, man, I am not good enough at this, and I need to really be my cover. What kind of advice do you have for someone like that of really living the part?
You made some good points in telling your story. So if you're recruiting somebody, fundamentally, it's not necessarily in their best interest. Right? Simply just getting caught for what they're doing, even if they're doing something noble, uh, could cause them great deal of pain and suffering. So it's all about trust. It's all about sincerity. And people see things that are sincere. They really do. You don't have to be something so different than yourself. And if you do, if you stretch that far, you're probably going to undermine your effort because you'll come across as insincere. The used car salesperson does not do well at this business because it's not about you, the case officer. It's all about the agent. Everything's about the agent, and everything is about securing their trust. And you're trying to either identify or, dare I say, manipulate some sort of life-changing event, something that's gone on in their life that will turn the difference between them not liking what they do and wishing they could do something and actually crossing the Rubicon and doing that. So to gain their trust, you have to try to size them up as best you can. Indirectly, if there's any possibility at first, if there's any materials or background or people have told you things about this person, or just based on your instincts and your efforts, try to reflect them like a mirror in a sense, without being too obvious, to try to pull out of them who they are, and then aligning, to your point, true elements of yourself. You can't invent really things about yourself and pull it off. So, there's a lot of aspects to every one of us. People are very deep and complex, which is what I love about them, which is what I enjoy about the art of intelligence, because we are so complex. We're not all swagger. We're also vulnerabilities. We're not all intellect. We're a bit of an adventurer. Some people more, less than others, right? To be fair. So you have to look at yourself and see what best aligns with this person, and then pull true parts of yourself. So, you skydived. Well, I can speak for myself. I was scared to death, but I had enough of adventurous spirit that, gosh darn, I was doing it, and I wanted to be first out of the plane, mostly because I wanted to get it over with. But that's that weird combination of terror and thrill that goes together. So there's different pieces of you. I was not the best student. I'm not the most intellectual person, but I'm clever enough and I have fascination for things. So I could sort of go a mile wide and an inch deep sincerely, because I do have an interest in a lot of subjects. I'm just not smart enough to be expert on them, but I don't have to be, because my job is just to show I have interest in something that the other person has interest in. So you can't just sort of be this total kind of cartoon character or something else that you're not. You have to find within yourself, what is my persona tonight? Even if you're going yourself, like I would tell students, if you're going to like an event, we call it a bump. A bump could be where, I'm looking for you. I know you're going to be at this party or whatever. So I'm already thought about what I'm going to do when I bump into you and how I'm going to bump into you. Or I'm going to a conference of, telecom people in Russia or whatever. I want to meet somebody with access to a certain business. So I don't know exactly who I'm meeting. I'm looking for an engineer or whatever like that. I need to know, okay, I'm going as me, Doug London, from whatever cover I'm using, an official US government platform, a non-official commercial thing. But who is Doug tonight? Am I more intellectual, less intellectual, more funny guy, more serious? And I am persona, all of which are parts of me. They're all genuine because I have all that in me. And that's what I'm showing tonight when I meet the engineer. So I'm not going to pretend to know enough about an engineer's work to really talk about business, but I need to know enough to show I care about it for whatever reason I do, that I've looked into it and I'm sincerely interested and probably impressed by those who can do it. And those are the bits and pieces. So folks can do that. Please.
No, finish your sentence, but I'm excited.
It's all different components of who we are. which is where, to your earlier point, you can get lost sometime in this reality. Like, what is the reality? Because you really are all the different little pieces that you use, because you can't pull it off if it's not sincere. But what's the real you? Yeah, I think there are moments that a case officer kind of goes through that.
Well, and let's talk about this for a bit. And I found it fascinating in the book where you talk about this idea of like, okay, the bump goes well, but now I need them to want to see me again.
Right.
And ideally somewhere that's screened from view in the black, or like a dark alley at 2 a.m. is going to have a hard time having cover for action. What are the two of you doing in a dark alley at 2 a.m.,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Um,
Exactly.
can you explain to people what you talk about in the book of this? Like, okay, the bump went well, but now what?
The ultimate aim of operation is to recruit this person as a clandestine agent, where they are secretly cooperating with you on behalf of the U.S. government to provide secrets about the job, organization. So, to protect them in the relationship, you need to move it out of the public eye, if it's at all in the public eye from the onset, as soon as you can. You need to move it in a more discreet fashion before they're recruited, essentially. There has to be some reason why, oh, I can't come to your embassy, Boris. I mean, because, you want to find some reason to be discreet. So you're looking to infuse a bit of a conspiratorial nature to the relationship, but the conspiracy has nothing to do with espionage. It's a bit of a bait and switch. And that has to do with also understanding and assessing the target, if you would. What are they interested in? What do they care about? So, um, Boris has a fascination with stamps and has always wanted this odd Brazilian, 10 lira stamp. And you kind of know about Boris's fascination. So you kind of find a way that it organically comes up. And you talk about this catalog or magazine or whatever like that. And Boris expresses interest, and you're like, I could give you that magazine, but you also know Boris probably doesn't want to be seen meeting a Westerner. And if you met Boris as an embassy official, so you're being understanding for Boris. You're going, listen, why don't we just grab a quick cup of coffee? It's not exactly clandestine, but you're not coming to the embassy. You're not calling him at his or her place of work. You're just moving it discreetly out of the way, and you're finding the bait and switch. Boris is interested in you because you can offer something to him. In this case, it's the stamps. But that's not what you want Boris for. But you then have to understand, what are Boris's bigger needs that will make it worth spying for you? Is it patriotism? And I do mean that sincerely, because Boris doesn't like Putin and thinks Putin is poison for Russia. Is it Boris got screwed over and wants to get back at the system or get back at his boss or whatever like that? So you find that, and then over time, you're slightly peeling the onion to move from stamps or fine wines or archery to espionage.
Yeah. So this idea of getting that second meeting out of the public eye, how much have you thought of what that's probably going to be before the bump versus how much is that the kinds of things, and based on the conversation, you're inventing it on the spot?
If it's a bump and it's brand new, you can't tell this person where to go. You can try to lead them, right? So you probably have a bunch of options, and you've done your homework and you've done your research, and you've gone from, not so good, bad to worse in terms of what's the level of threat that's acceptable. So it's probably going to be a public venue. It might very well be a public venue, because why, you can explain, oh, I need to meet you in a back alley at, 2 a.m. No, obviously not. But you can come up with reasons for, why you want to avoid great attention, because, hey, listen, I'm going to be taking time off from the embassy or from my job. And I told him I got a doctor's appointment. So I'd rather not bump into one of my colleagues, or for his sake, the same thing. So you're doing these kind of like little bits of transitions. So you've got to be prepared, because I can meet you and things will be working, right? I meet you at this conference, and it's like, oh, Jess, your work, that's inspiring. I'm really interested in doing so, but I don't know that my job would be too thrilled about it, or that your job would be too thrilled about meeting me because of whatever I am. And whatever persona I'm using. So I have to have a series of venues, locations to run by you that hopefully will appeal to you, but also meet my security standards. But you may not bite at the first one. So I've got to have backups. I'm going to try to control the event and try to control where we go, but I don't want you to realize that I'm doing that. I want you to think that this is best for you. These are your ideas. This is your interest, so that you don't see that I'm actually trying to manipulate. So it's a lot of homework and prep that goes into it.
Yeah. Well, um, I'm thinking about this in terms of the class that our charity is going to provide for law enforcement, right? And so, by the way, anybody who wants to support that, on childrescue.org, there's a whole thing. We've got a tactical fundraiser where if you donate $200, you can come to a half-day class with a green beret, and there's some fun stuff, everybody. But thinking specifically about some of the things you said today and some of the things in the book, I really want to talk about these security concerns of like, okay, hey, you've got the SDR, and you've got the, this meeting, the second venue you talked about, where probably needs screening, so we're not being seen by everyone or the cameras even there. And what if I am ambushed, like you said? What's my escape and evasion? What's my plan from here? And the all these different elements, and maybe it needs to be short. And in the book, you talk about the mad minute. What are we doing here together? And these kind of things. Maybe we can break down a couple of those things. So, like, you read in all the fiction books and you see in the movies, and then the nonfiction books, people talk about SDRs. And for anybody who isn't familiar with this, detection route, surveillance detection
Surveillance detection route. Yeah.
Why is it that you want to make these major turns? Like what? Like, why do people? Somebody who isn't familiar with that, like, and they hear, they're reading about somebody's SDR in a Jason Bourne fiction book, and he's like, oh, he took this corner so he could spot that choke point or whatever. Why is that so important to somebody before they get on the X, as you call it?
So in most events, let's say for me, right? So I'm CIA, so I'm operating overseas. As well as I can know that turf or that environment, a professional surveillance team is going to know it better than me. So, the Russians or the Chinese or whoever's following me around in China or Russia or wherever, that's all they do. They grew up there. They know those routes. They know these streets. They know everything about it. They just don't know where I'm going to go before I do. So my advantage is I am manipulating the environment, which they know even better than me. They know this street. They know that avenue. They know where it intersects, but they don't know where I'm going to make this turn or that turn. So when I'm trying to detect surveillance, I can't let it look like I'm trying to detect surveillance, because as soon as I do that, they know I'm doing something original. It has to look to them like it's boring. Should they be following me, that it makes sense. It fits in my pattern of life. We talk about patterns of life that you deliberately establish by what you do every day. Spying's 24/7. You don't like go and call in the surveillance people and go, hey, I'm not working today. I got my kid's birthday party to go to. Everything you do every day is factored in, particularly nowadays with artificial intelligence and ubiquitous technical surveillance of cameras and tracking and all this kind of stuff. So everything you're doing is to deliberately manipulate the profile they see you already having, the environment that you're working. So I can't be looking over my shoulder and stuff like that, because that's going to stand out. It has to look like I'm going to do my errands. I'm taking my kid to his or her soccer game. I'm taking the dog for grooming. I'm running whatever errands I'm doing, and that I'm doing nothing funny. I'm not speaking. I'm not ducking. I'm not hiding and running out and popping out. Because once I do that, then instead of having 5 people, I'll have 20 people follow me in helicopters and drones, and they'll know I'm up to no good. So you're deliberately manipulating the environment. So, at this intersection, when I make this left turn, I'm going to have a great field of view that's going to be very natural, that will look 2 blocks back. When I'm walking down this street, I get this great look because there's nowhere to hide if they're paralleling me. Things like that, you've cased. That's why you talk about casing. And you've cased this out. You don't just do it on the fly. Everything's planned. And really, the art of the surveillance detection route is the planning even more than the execution, because you succeed based on where you've already predetermined you're going to get your best opportunities, because you're going to collapse the surveillance at certain points. You know they're going to have to draw in on you here, but you also know there's an advantage to see this place. It's all very well thought out over extensive periods of time.
Yeah. Well, you talked about this idea of having been ambushed and that there's always the possibility of being ambushed, right? Can you talk about, for people who don't understand why that might need, a meeting might need to take place so fast? Like, this idea of the X of like, you've come this way, your agent came this way, you meet at this one spot, you're barely overlapping. Can you talk about like, I'm sure people can guess, but can you talk more about like how important, like you talked about in the book, you talked about the mad minute and that, hey, this meeting isn't going to take very long. Can you talk about that?
So if you're meeting your agent face to face, you're trying to minimize the time that are exposed. And their greatest danger is when you're together or at any point your routes overlap, which is to your point, you're trying to approach a site, if you're meeting at a site on foot or by car or whatever, from two directions and proceed in two different directions so that you're not overlapping and you're not kind of turning back on maybe the surveillance that's behind you. So you need to find out, you've planned for how long your meeting is going to be based on precedent with this agent. And sometimes, it's aligned. In fact, it's always aligned to the agent's lifestyle. So you may have a very sensitive agent. I've had agents that could only get away from their family for like 1 hour. They couldn't explain or their job because they were on call. So they couldn't be gone for any more than an hour or whatever it was. So that includes them getting to you and leaving you. So now you're thinking, okay, how much time do I actually have for a meeting? So without getting into details of like the math, meetings are tailored to your agent's availability. So you may be out there for hours or days to get to your meeting. Your agent may only have, I'm just artificially using it, an hour to get from home to the meeting to back without, doing anything funny that looks suspicious and everything that they could explain. So you've done all this planning, you've planned for a certain length of time, but let's say you get to the meeting. The first question you ask about is obviously their security, is everything okay? And wouldn't you do that if you were just meeting me for lunch? You and I just got together. You'd probably say, hey, how is traffic? Is everything okay? It's a very human thing to do. So you don't do it like it's a checklist and you're a robot. Okay, how's your security? It's like, hey, how you doing? Any problems getting here? How's life at home? Yada, yada. But then you need to know how much time they have. Because if you start getting into the meeting and you're talking and they're answering questions and whatever like that, and all of a sudden they go, gotta run, you haven't had time to factor in all the business. So, the second question you always ask is, how much time do you have? It could be, I got 30 minutes, I got 50 minutes, I've only got 5 minutes. And you then collapse down everything you need to do in the amount of time you have.
I mean, that one is fascinating to me because I feel like there's so many parallels of, either dating or sales or building this kind of a relationship. I think 5 minutes, that is incredible to like, hey, what's our cover for, like you've got what's our cover for action for being here together? You got your mad minute and now you got 4 more minutes. Like, how do you possibly compress into 4 minutes?
Well, it helps I'm from New York City, so I talk really fast, but you got to remember, you're generally doing this in a foreign language. So I'm doing this in Russian or Arabic or French, and my colleagues are doing it in all sorts of languages. And sometimes my 3 languages are an in-between language. So I'm talking to, I'm talking to a Russian in Arabic. Well, a Russian I would know, but a Chinese in Arabic because they know Arabic, but they don't know English. So yeah, you're doing all this then, but you've thought it through because you've given yourself all the different permutations of how the meeting can go. So one, among the big differences, and we find, because when I was at the farm, we trained certain law enforcement people, we trained certain people from the FBI. It's really getting them out of their domestic mindset because as law enforcement, they're used to having their gun in their bench. They don't got to worry. They could be seen. What's the big deal? Forget about it. Right? And often, not often, that's really unfair. But times they think of their sources as like informants, snitches, which in and of itself sort of takes them down a level that's going to influence the nature of that dynamic between them and in a negative way. So we've had law enforcement types who have struggled with CIA's training because there's no bat. And the gun is only, God forbid, somebody's about to shoot at you if you even have one. It's not home turf. You can't just, walk on off and say, hey, I'm bureau, whatever like that. Bad things can happen to you. Your security is as much in that agent's as that agent's security in your hands. So you better treat them with some respect and not just think of them as a disposable snip. So our work is all about, hiding, right? Because we've got to hide. Um, that human dynamic, and you're putting a lot of faith in an agent who you can only trust to a point, because it's not like an ODA, a special forces unit, where they're their brothers and sisters in arms, right? They might have to send each other into harm's way, but they know that they've got their back. Yeah, maybe my agent is going to be there for me. Maybe my agent's turned, and I don't know that until I get there. So as a CIA foreign intelligence collector, it's all about dynamic adjustments to circumstances, manipulation, not force, right? Not flashing a badge, not like, kung fuing my way out of something, ideally talking my way out of something if I actually get into trouble, because it's not home field. It's foreign field. I don't own it.
Yeah. There's so many other things to talk there about, skills for conflict diffusing and lowering unhelpful negative emotions so that everybody gets out of this safely. I want to switch gears though, because I think, so I was talking to, so I just gave one of your copies of books to a other intelligence officer. This book is, you got to get this one. So I bought him a copy, gave it to him yesterday. And he said, are there things you're surprised in it? And I said, I think the things that are most surprising to me are the ways that like truth is stranger than fiction. Like you talk about the intelligence officer who used to come over and watch Ninja Turtles and stuff at your family with your kids. Yeah. And this, like, I feel like you did such a good job of explaining that difference of like, no, this is a partnership. This is a friendship. This is not me above them and they're this low life informant. I feel like the book communicated that so well. But I was surprised to hear that you had them to your house, I think one of my favorite ones is the guy who had to ask his wife permission.
Yeah.
And you talked about like, you had to be very specific about how to pick him up in the car and having the right hunker site, but then also saying like, I don't want to stay here too long because we're going to be safer on the move. And then we had to go back and get the wife so that she could approve. I mean, that has so many layers to it, but can you talk about this? Like, okay, the complications of being in a vehicle and the complications of like just completely out of left field, your agent brings up an objection. Like, you talked about sparring in the book.
Yeah.
And the spar is, can we bring my wife in on this?
There's uncomfortable moments. It's human beings, and you can't always know for sure how people are going to react. So, spying operations is really an experientially learned profession. We teach tradecraft and we teach certain techniques, and we try to take candidates, right, and we find natural traits they already have to try to be better. But how people react in certain circumstances, you think how they react because, oh, I'm an expert on Chinese or Iranians, and I've seen this a million times. You don't know. You assess them as best you can and try to determine which way they're going to go when you get to this point in the road. And you try to predict so that you can spar with them if you have to. Like we talk about sparring at the recruitment pitch, where you're actually sort of laying on the line, what you're asking them to do, why you're asking them to do it, what's in it for them with them. And, if you've done your job well, you've anticipated their objections to spar over, which actually stands for, I think, like stop, pause, reflect, because you're not going, you're wrong, you'll be fine. Because, sometimes the objection is, I'm going to get killed. You don't say, don't worry about it. No chance you're going to get killed, because that's a lot. You're going to tell them, in understanding how they think, what's going to convince them that, Yeah, there's a risk, but it's a risk you control. Please, Jess.
So the reflect in that. Do you know this book, Never Split the Difference? Chris Voss, former
I
head of
do,
FBI hostage
as a matter
negotiator.
of fact.
Okay,
Yes, and I've heard him speak.
so is it similar to that, or like in sales, where you're taking a breath and you're repeating back to them what they said, so they know that, so that they feel listened to, and so that you've clarified that what we're talking about before you go trying to answer objection? Is
Yeah,
that the reflect?
those are really key blocks of it. So you want to validate that you've heard what they've said and that you're taking it seriously and you're not minimizing. So like in sales or having an argument with your partner, right? It's like, no, I never did that. Or, I mean, you've got to make them feel validated and taken seriously and reflecting the right emotions. So you're diffusing anger or whatever, but you're also very emotional and passionate because when you're trying to persuade someone to do something that's not necessarily great for them, you have to appeal to their motivations. It's always about their motivations, you know. So if you're selling, you know, why do you want to get into this Volvo? You know, what it is about it that they want about a Volvo, how that solves a problem in their life. And you have to keep going back to the motivations without dismissing their concerns. So that's the whole stopping and pausing and reflecting and then responding in a way that doesn't dismiss, take seriously, but gives them an answer that makes them feel heard out and satisfied without ever that tinge of insincerity. It's like, oh, you don't have to worry about it. That's not what I said. Or, you know, I'm sorry you feel that way. Or I understand why you feel that way. And here's how we as a team, because it's always about team, are going to overcome this because it's worth doing. Because you couldn't look at yourself in the morning if you didn't do this.
I feel like we have a lot of founders of companies, CEOs here, and we have a lot of investment fund managers that listen to the show, and they're constantly having to talk to big capital sources on put your money into our fund instead of that fund, right? And I feel like they all need to read your book because you talk about these ideas of you're repeating back, before you pitch them. You're reiterating all the things that they already said about, being discontent with this and how they feel strongly about that. And, you're feeding their own words back from even previous meetings, and you're talking about the motivations. And I can't remember which pitch it was, but I think it was the one about the guy who was so intelligent, but had been sidelined by his organization because of his ethnic background. And so people were actually getting promotions by stealing his work. And you were able to you brought up that you're like, he was giving me the no emotion look until I brought up that one aspect, and I could see the look of I had struck a chord of that is painful to have worked so hard and been so loyal and then be so disrespected by my own organization. And you got that emotional charge going, and so I think everybody should go to Amazon.com right now and buy The Recruiter, purely for this story of the husband who has to ask his wife permission to be a spy. And we may as well spoil it, but she basically gets really mad at him of saying,
Yeah.
why didn't you accept? That's $1,000 a month for our family. What are you thinking? And then says, Mr. Doug, we of course would love to work together with you. But the question I have about this is, you talked about, I wanted to get to a hunker site so I could look him in the eye and have that more emotional resonance. And then I need to get on the road because it was safer. How do you make that decision of when to pull over, when to be moving in that unexpected fluid situation? What was going through your mind?
You're following the emotion of the exchange. You're sensing where it's going, and it's not by chance. You've inserted, as you've said, phrases, things they've said before, because you're leading them to a point. You're trying to get to that crossroad when you kind of pitch them. It's got to be personal. It's got to be dynamic, and it's not easy to do. I know a lot of colleagues who really have trouble pulling the trigger, we say, just looking someone in the eye and asking them to spy. Getting there is all calculated. So you're moving the conversation through these emotional checkpoints, right? And you're checking, yes, they're responding that way. Right. I expect them to respond that way when I bring up the fight that they had with their boss. Yes, I expect them to respond that way when I talk about their kids' tuition because it's a private school, because the schools the government has are so poor. If only they had money for tuition. and I'm validating things. I call it public, well, we call it public pronouncements. They're public pronouncements because they're things they've already said to me, reflecting a concern, an issue, a need that I'm then, as you said, repeating back to them at a calculated time and place as I'm leading them to the point where the pitch is coming. And it's not just the pitch, it's, an agent that's been around for 5 years and I'm re-recruiting them because you're always reestablishing that motivation. Is it still there? Making sure they're still on board, making sure that they're still inspired, because a lot of it is inspiration. It's not, just the money that goes into it. So the timing of when I turn and when I do my theatrical pause and reflection and look in their eye, looking down and looking back, that's all deliberately planned and rehearsed, but likewise totally dynamic because it has to shift based on what they do because people do funny things.
Well, I gotta say, like, you had me, like, that's a complete page turner part of the book for me, because you were totally having to on the fly go like, yeah, my chief of station is gonna lose their mind that we're now bringing your wife into it with no prep. I haven't previously warmed up this potential agent. I guess we're gonna go get her, and you're having to make that call on the spot. And like, I mean, all those safety things have to occur all over again. Like, you don't know her. You don't know how she's gonna react. Like, I'm guessing, like, I mean, even the safety things of getting in and out of the car. Like, I'm just guessing, but does he have to tell her, like, hey, we got to have a screening for how we're getting in this car so we don't see her, and like getting out, and like you've got to figure all that out real time. Like the car almost, I guess the car gives me anxiety of like, it's just like this extra element of the police and the potential accidents and the, like, what are you telling her? What are you telling him to tell her about? We're going to get in a car and go on a ride with my American friend.
Well, the site is predetermined and it's been cased. So if they're at the right place, they're meeting at a place that ideally has some screening. You have probably already, having already agreed with him, I was like, okay, well, bring her here and have her, I wanted them to, be seated differently than they wound up being seated. So I had to adjust to that as well because he just went in the back seat with her. I didn't think it was going to be that way, but that's fine. So you have everything.
Because you wanted to look her in the eyes? You wanted her in the front seat?
Right.
Yeah.
But she got in the back. He went in the back with her. So if she went in the back, I at least wanted him in the front or one of them in the front. But that's fine because now I'm like the chauffeur and it's in a country where I was clearly a foreigner. They were not. And why was the foreigner driving the two nationals in the back seat like an Uber came? So a little weird, but I didn't have a whole lot of choice, and I had to decide at what point I was going to raise the most sensitive part of the conversation. I want to do that while we're stopped and I'm looking at them, as opposed to like just driving along at 60 miles an hour, going, by the way, because you want that intimacy, you want that connection, and some cultures, remember, don't even look you in the eye. Sometimes their culture is that they naturally, out of respect, avert eyes or looking in the eye has another meaning. So you've got a lot of different things going. You've got to understand the people you're dealing with, but also the culture, the local customs and such like that. And you have to sew all that in together. So you're refining everything you do with people based on all the differences that they have based on age, nationality, ethnicity, experience.
And you described this point where you're like, man, I had basically not finished pitching her, but I'm worried we've been at the hunker too long. I need to get back on the road. Is it because being parked is more suspicious, or being parked is more likely for somebody to come across you? And so you're like, oh, even though I'm not quite done the pitch, I'm going to get on the road. Is that what's going through your mind?
Yeah, both. One, often, being parked, depending where you're parked, stands out as opposed to moving on a car moving on a road is a car moving on a road. A car parked, okay, if you're parked on the street with other parked cars, but there are people in this car, that looks funny. If you're like, one of the most fascinating things you want to do is just go to, a Target or a grocery store and just spend 15 minutes in your car in the parking lot. The amazing and weird things that happen. And these are just normal people. These aren't spies. You might think they're spies or criminals because People do really weird things in parking lots. So think how that looks to the police, to an innocent passerby. They might think, well, these are people casing my house to rob it, particularly in some dangerous areas, right? So they see a car with a bunch of people, particularly if the engine's running, they're calling absolutely, they're calling the cops. So you don't want to hunker for too long. You want to keep moving. So you're balancing what I want to accomplish with all the counterintelligence and security considerations at the same time. And a lot of it is just feel, you know, this no longer feels good, right? This area, all of a sudden I see two more people walking their dog, or that old lady took a real funny side eye look at me. I'm getting out of here because I just, my spidey senses start to tingle.
And I'm guessing that preparation, you're like, okay, I think I'm going to go here next. Or so another one of my favorite stories in the book is the older, kind of more erudite gentleman who, who you guys are driving around and you end up getting chased by the counter surveillance team, a hostile organization. Meanwhile, he's commentating on being annoyed at how bad his country is at catching him. And I mean, it seemed like, are you like almost just constantly running a surveillance detection route the whole time you're driving with your agent?
You're always running a surveillance detection route because you're black to the meeting, but you don't know if you're still black the next step, the next block. So whether you're walking or driving or whatever you're doing, you're constantly incorporating and looking for surveillance, incorporating movements. You've planned everything out. You know where you're going to walk, you know where you're going to drive so that you can continue to look for surveillance. So yeah, this guy, one of the most interesting folks I ever worked with. And he was, just a very classy gentleman of the old world, without revealing too much of where this was. He was a very senior official in his security service. So he was an intel officer himself, and dealt with counterespionage and all of that. And I recruited him, let us say, non-officially. So he didn't think he was working for the U.S. government. I mean, he figured it out over time, but he never wanted to be slapped in the face with it because it made him feel better. But he thought I was a non-official Westerner. I won't even, in fact, Westerners as far as I can go in terms of how it was. So he thought he was consulting, but that included giving me secret documents and all that kind of stuff to give my commercial interest a competitive advantage. So this one night that we actually had met at a safe house, and safe houses are not quite probably what people think about. They've got to be just a normal place that has a life to itself, but that you can use on occasion, because it's not just like an empty place, because empty places are not safe houses. Because people go, why is that house empty all the time? Why do different people come like once a week, once a month? So it was a safe house that also wasn't associated with any government entity. And had my meeting there. It was on a compound where it would make sense for someone of my complexion to be seen, but also someone like him, because well-to-do people from that country live there as well as foreigners. And surveillance set up what we call a static choke point, because they looked at all the foreigners, because any foreigner could be a spy to them. And they kept an eye on different compounds, and my luck, right? They had a static surveillance vehicle watching the compound, just thought something funny about this car coming out with just, me, a passenger, because he was low. He's supposed to be out of sight, without detail, was not visible through the rear window. But it just looked funny because who's leaving, especially in this country, there was a lot of crime. Who's leaving at this time of the morning? So a lot of times, because surveillance are not well paid, you're hoping they're just sleeping and not going to bother. But I had a very, hard charging team, and they followed me. And I knew it right away, even without having to go into myself, because they were pretty obvious. They just, it was just me and them were the only two cars. And they, rumbled their way onto the street. And I was like, ooh. So it's like, ooh, this is not good. So you don't try to do Jason Bourne stuff. You don't try to lose surveillance. So we had a protocol. We had the station did how to handle something like this. And it was essentially to get him back to the compound because it's not likely they're going to be kicking down the door of the safe house because that's bad press for them with the foreigners and stuff like that. They'll probably just wait us out. And we had a way that we would get him off compound. But as I told you and your audience earlier, he was one of these guys who was so senior, he could only be away for a small amount of time. Even his wife didn't know that he was spying, doing what he was doing. So I tried to convince him to let me take him back and we'll get him off safely. And he was like, can't do it, can't be done, whatever. So, my heart's racing a million beats because here's, a very sensitive agent.
Yeah, I loved his line about like, oh, I trust you. You'll get it done because it needs to happen now.
Right.
Basically.
And
you're like, I don't trust you.
Wow. Just the amount of confidence he had in me is like, you'll take care of it, like very nonchalantly. And he was a supremely confident guy. And I guess you get to be that senior, but I would have been scared to, really scared to death if it was him because I've got like divisions in my mind. You see newspaper headlines and, me being carroted off in chains and this guy up against the wall just flashed through my head. And I know that my chief of station is going to have my neck for all this, but I thought the agent said he can't go back. He said he's got to get out of this. Take care of him. So,
which speaks to the idea of like a partner instead of a lowly informant.
That's exactly right.
Where you really care about him and what he needs.
Right. I couldn't tell him, here's what we're doing. My COS, my chief of station, would have preferred I told him that. Just said, we're going back. Maybe I could have, because it's not like he's going to do a stunt roll out of the car. Or maybe he would have actually, this guy. But I got out of Dodge. But as I'm racing to the streets of the city and I'm in a...
Can you talk about that for 1 second, actually?
Sure.
What was that decision tree of, being the gray man, let them follow me around but I don't want to be anything interesting, to the point where you're like, actually this just tipped. I got to lose these guys.
This ship is sent. So this the team's on me and I know the protocol. I know what they're going to do. So they're not going to just surveil you with one car. They're going to start vectoring other teams and
box you in around it or something.
Right. And it's their city. So, I'm not in a diplomatic vehicle. I don't have any protections. They've got no reason not to stop me. So at any point they could throw a checkpoint, pull me over, and then we're all done here. So it was very quickly that I've got to get away quick before they stop, before they pull teams ahead. I know they got communications and they could do that. And I know what the evolution is going to be because I know my adversary. And I'm also not in, let's say, a high-powered car because I'm in a very sort of local, slow car without too many revealing details.
With something that blends in.
And it certainly did. It blended in. So I'm wheeling around the streets and trying to literally get Black and get away from sight, at least long enough for him to get to the car. All I got to do is get him out of the car. If they stop me, whatever, I'll get a speeding ticket, maybe reckless driving, whatever. There were some complications because I wasn't who I really was in that country. I was somebody else. So the worst case is I'm going home. Right? They'll beat me up. They'll throw me in jail for a few days. Then they'll put me on an airplane. I can live with that. But I need to find a gap. There's a gap in their observation of me that I could get him out of the car long enough that they don't see him getting out of the car and they keep chasing me and not him. So as I'm doing this and trying to think through it, and there's like no GPS, I'm not like, don't have Google Map person telling me where to go, which you wouldn't use anyway, because think about it, that's a tracking device. And if you're using GPS is watching you. So it's all area knowledge. And I'm trying to decide where I'm going to go, where I might get an opportunity for a gap and get him out of the car. And I start hearing him talking. And I thought at first, and I'm really tense, right? So, how you get tunnel vision in a moment like this? So you kind of get tunnel hearing. My wife tells me all the time, it's not my hard of hearing. I just don't hear her. I'm not listening to her. I heard his voice and I thought he was telling me something or that I had to do something, but he's mumbling about the surveillance and he's doing like a teacher. He's doing a critique on their skill level. They're giving me too much room. They didn't take the turn fast enough. They're doing this. And I'm like, what the, oh my, various curse words are going through my head right now. I didn't say anything to him, but I'm like, he's seriously critiquing these people who are going to kill him. And I was just like shocked. And he's a very old world guy, very articulate, sort of old school colonial
Gentlemanly.
version of English. Yes. So his words are just beautiful, And it's like, stop it. So it was an entertaining evening. And he never panicked. And I never showed panic. I was panicking on the inside. I was totally panicking, but not on the outside and not on what I was doing.
Can I
Please.
ask you about that for 1 second, actually?
Yeah.
What do you tell yourself, or how do you override those natural inclinations toward panic? What's your trick for overriding that and staying calm?
Just
Or
channel
what do
it.
you tell yourself? Or
I just channel it into energy. Just when things like that happen, when a scary moment is coming on, I usually will charge towards it in a sense of just channeling myself towards it and channeling those feelings, letting them obstruct me. So it's like, okay, here's how I'm going to take this turn, and here's what I'm going to do. So, a case officer's natural inclination is to try to be multiple steps ahead of any event because you're trying to anticipate and deflect and what have you, whatever threats might come towards you. Because again, we're not about fighting the threat. And in this case, I was doing the opposite. I was trying to lose surveillance as opposed to kind of go into the shadows. So it's about, okay, where am I turning next? What am I going to do? And I'm visualizing in my head these several steps.
and okay, sorry about the tangent. Let's go back. Did you already have a sense of where the gap was going to be, and you were trying to get to it, or were you spotting? Were you scanning? Is that going to be a gap? Is that going to be a gap?
I had potential. So I had an
Okay.
idea of where I was going to use. And then I had to make sure that they would work because the gap required a certain distance between me and them where I knew I was out of observation, but also out of earshot, but also I don't have a nosy neighbor or somebody looking. So all those things are coming into my focus. So I thought about different places, but I had to sort of size them up at the time. Is this going to work now? Is this not going to work now? Based on their distance, based on was anybody on the street? Were there lights on in windows? All those kind of dynamics going on at the same time.
Yeah. Well, I have so many more questions. We're just going to have you back on the show. We're going to have to do this again
Sounds like
because
fun.
this is so fun. Maybe a final one. I was fascinated with this story, and I think it shows your humility to put it in. The story where you talked about the agent, things were iffy, and they missed the appointed meeting time, and so you went for the variant. You talked about like, hey, we have this prearranged thing of like, so we don't have to call each other and reschedule. It's like, we'll come back to the same place in an hour and come back to the same place, same time in a week, and these kind of things. Can you talk about what's going through your head and why it's so important to have the variant where you don't have to make a phone call?
So you want to stay off the grid. So you don't want to have to call your agent or do anything electronic and email anything digital because those things are forever. Phone calls, the internet is forever. It's out there. There's evidence out there connecting the two of you. And that's what you're trying to avoid. So you have a communications plan, which is like laid out in steps. While your audience should definitely get my book, they might also get books like The $1 Billion Spy, which is a story about Adolf Tokachev, who was a famous agent we ran in Moscow, or The Secret Life about a famous Polish agent. And it'll offer you some ideas that this agent had like the next 10 meeting venues already laid out so that there would be no worried about having to otherwise come in contact with the agent in any way, shape, or form. It's all pre-planned. So in this case, the agent had that. He was kind of a new agent, but an agent who posed a potential physical security threat because tough life for this poor chap. This agent was a member of the counterintelligence service, but was also associated with the terrorist group that the counterintelligence service was fighting, which is why the CI service wanted him, and which is why the terrorists wanted him, because both groups wanted him to work against the other. We tried to vet him, and part of the vetting was, in this case, it was a lie detector test, a polygraph, which he blew. And he blew to the question of, he was who he claimed to be, but he blew to the question of, did he intend to do me any harm? I met him anyway. Well, polygraphs are instruments, right? They're tools. They're not lie detectors.
Imprecise.
And they tell you something was on this guy's mind. They don't tell you what. They're not mind readers. So with the empirical evidence I had otherwise, and because of the value this agent provided to us, I got my boss to sign on, headquarters, not too happy, but they signed on. So we took all these security protocols, and it was one of the times where I actually had a team of people, 2 cars, just one person to provide counter surveillance, being that they were there to see, did he bring any other bad guys with him? Did he bring anybody with him? Was he alone? Was he there? They would tell me he was there before I had to go into the site, which itself meant to be concealed. Also had some physical dangers of an ambush. So, we had our plan, we had our schedule. He wasn't there. We had our variant. He wasn't there. I was then supposed to come back to what we call an alternate, which would be another date, another time, and actually another location, just in case he couldn't be there because there was a problem with the place. His brother-in-law lives there, whatever, who the hell knows? But I so kept thinking, all right, this is probably my fault, right? Because we communicated in a foreign language. So maybe I got the date wrong. Maybe he misunderstood the time. That's right. He's coming back at this time. So I sent my counter surveillance home because that was the protocol. And I was supposed to go as well, but I stayed, made that extra variant, came into the site, and the site was a very dark, very narrow road. This country was in the middle of, I think it's fair to say, a civil war at the time between the terrorist group and this guy. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, because I cased this place, never saw a house. This was a little connecting road between 2 areas in this town. All I see is a car turning to block the road that was in front of me. It's rare to see cars at this time of night anyway. And this car is blocking to turning to block the road. It's like, oh my God, it's an ambush. Because that's how you train. You train for a T, right? That they're going to block you from behind and block you from front and behind. And they teach you how to ram cars and shoot through things and all kind of good stuff. So, the training kicks in. So I start preparing because there's a formula to where you want to hit the car and what part of it, where is the weight of the car, where's the weight of your car, where's the kinetic energy, and then what are you going to do afterwards? Because ta-ha, I made it past them. Yeah, but they're still chasing. So what are you going to do then? So all that flashes in my mind. And then just as I'm getting ready and I'm coming in, I'm going to ram the car because there was also a car behind me, which is why I thought it was definitely an ambush. I just see this little old guy just kind of barely fall out of the car. He was maybe, 4'5" or something like that. And there was actually a driveway. He had a little farm off the side of the road. So I was seconds away from plowing into this poor unsuspecting farmer. And luckily, I sort of evolved quick enough that I was able to shut down my car and everything was fine. But let's say it wasn't one of my best moments. I should have gone home. That was the protocol. But if you're a case officer, you never lie to your own team. You never manipulate. You never trick. You've got to be totally upfront. So I told my boss. I got teased. I got chided. I got kind of made fun of. But okay, you effed up. Next time, follow the protocol. That's why we had the process.
That's so awesome. Okay, we for sure need to have you back on the show.
Thanks, Jess.
But where are the best places to buy the book? Connect with you on social, websites, any of that?
So Amazon has them. You certainly get them there. Target has them. Barnes and Nobles, bookstores have them. I don't know what is coming next is the paperback. So the paperback is out on September 6th. So the paperback should be all at your local stores as well as online from all the Noble sellers. Amazon still has hard copies, though, if you want to get that. But they should be available everywhere, particularly come September 6th when the paperback's out. But you can pre-order now.
And audible.com, where I bought mine.
Audible and Kindle and Barnes and Noble's e-readers, they're all available that way. And the Audible narrator sounds so much better than me. So you should definitely get the audio version and listen to him because he sounds like a spy. He sounds really cool. But that's available now as well.
And are you doing some consulting as well, or mostly just the writing and teaching?
Mostly writing and teaching. I do a little consulting from time to time. It's usually for worthy causes. But I spend most of my time teaching. I teach a course at Georgetown each semester on Intel Studies for graduate students. I also work with some individual mentors and do some coaching as well. But I also write for various publications. Occasionally, Foreign Affairs will stick me into their pages, or Just Security, or even sometimes I'm really lucky I get into a major media.
Oh, how exciting. Well, listen, I appreciate you, all the stuff you did to try and make our country safer, and the things your family had to put up with for you to live a life like this. And uh, even though I know you think it was a lot of fun, I know you made a lot of sacrifices that make it so I can raise my family the way that I want to. So appreciate you for that.
Thank you, Jess. It's my pleasure to serve.
Thanks for making time for this.
Appreciate it.
Bye now.